Well, we have our eyes on Boeing shares today, selling off as the company's MAX 9 planes are being grounded until the FAA deems them safe to fly. Now, this is following an incident on Friday where a side panel was blown out mid-air on an Alaskan Airlines flight from Portland to Oregon to Ontario, California. A small section of the plane's fuselage blew out at 16,000 feet. There were no deaths, and the flight was able to return safely to Portland. The National Transportation Safety Board has since found the panel in the backyard of an Oregon teacher's home. Now, this incident comes just a week after the aerospace giant warned its customers about potential loose bolts in some of its 737 MAX jets. So how are pilots feeling about these aircraft? We have Anthony Roman. He is the founder and CEO of AC Roman and Associates, as well as an FAA licensed commercial pilot. Thank you for joining us this morning. So, for people who are still getting up to speed on this story here, talk about the use of this particular door and how planes tend to use it versus a typical emergency door, how this space is used.
Well, the space is used as an emergency door, given the type of configuration of the seats in the airplane that actually is requested by the airline during the order process. If that does not provide a second emergency door exit, then a door plug is used, very similar to a door, but there's no access to that door from the inside of the aircraft. Quite frankly, the question remains, was that door design flawed, or was it a mechanic who incorrectly closed the door prior to flying?
And thankfully, this happened at 16,000 feet. I mean, it's obviously still very terrifying, but versus being at cruising altitude, for people who would be on the plane in that sort of environment, what would that actually feel like? What would be happening inside the plane?
It's a terrifying experience, frankly. And they are quite fortunate, yes, that it happened at a lower altitude where the air is a bit heavier and thicker. And so the decompression would not have been as terribly violent as it would have been at 32,000 feet, yet extremely dangerous. When that heavy door is ejected from the fuselage, they are quite fortunate, one, that it did not hit the empennage of the aircraft, the small wing and tail in the rear. The airplane would likely have lost control and everyone would have been lost. If you're in that aircraft, when that explosive decompression occurs, frankly, it is an explosive sound that must have terrified the passengers. They must have felt that this was the end. And simply the air rushes out at hurricane force from the cabin, and anything that was not secured, any objects soft and hard, would fly out of that hole where the door was ejected, and that in itself could cause severe injury or death if a passenger is hit with a hard object flying out. Terrible experience.
So, Anthony, when we think of where we go from here, obviously a horrible experience for those on the flights, but what about the wake-up calls in terms of the training that's needed and the investigations needed to really secure these planes?
Well, I think that the flight crew performed superbly, frankly. They were disciplined. The flight attendants, whose primary responsibility is certainly not serving food or helping you find your seat. It certainly is safety, safety first, and coordinating the emergency procedures when an incident like this happens. In this case, the recordings reflect that the flight attendants performed superbly and probably saved many passengers. The flight crew performed as expected, professionally, communicating with air traffic control and descending at a proper descent rate and landing the plane successfully. Missing a door can cause some control difficulties, flutter on the empennage, which creates shaking of the controls in the cockpit and other difficult maneuvering type of problems. So the flight crew, superb.
And you certainly have to have nerves of steel in that sort of environment where everything is happening and it's so loud. And as you mentioned, almost an explosive sort of environment when something like that happens. So I do want to ask you then about some of the warning signals, because we're seeing reports that there were some concerns about depressurization issues with this aircraft. How difficult is it for staff to really voice their concerns and have them addressed properly?
Well, it's procedural. And believe me, the flight crew, when they see pressurization problems in that type of aircraft or any type of aircraft, the first thing they are going to do is run their checklist. And then, if that doesn't resolve the problem, notify the mechanics and have it inspected prior to flight. What surprises me here is that this incident occurred several times, including depressurization problems just the day prior to the accident. And I'm surprised that Alaska Airlines did not ground their MAX 9 fleet and conduct a thorough inspection of all of the aircraft to see it could be replicated. What they did do, I think, was very limited in nature. They prohibited Alaska Airline MAX 9s from overwater flight. A good judgment, but I don't think that it was sufficient given what happened on this plane several times.
So what do you think needs to be communicated from here on out? Obviously, a lot of people, you still want to fly, they want to feel safe, perhaps feeling a little bit unnerved about what they're seeing in the news. What should people remember as they're seeing these stories flying by?
Well, the FAA has grounded all MAX 9s. The NTSB is currently performing investigations, both forensic and physical inspections of the aircraft, all of the systems, including the flight data recorder, which records all of the control actions that both pilots conducted following the incident and prior to the incident. Regrettably, the voice data recorder was overwritten, and so all communications between the pilots has been lost. Fortunately, it's procedure for air traffic control to preserve the recordings of the communication with the pilots prior to, during, and after the emergency. So at least the NTSB and FAA has access to that.
We appreciate you taking the time to join us. A very important story here. We know a lot of people watching. Anthony Roman, founder and CEO of AC Roman and Associates and an FAA licensed commercial pilot. Thank you for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.